Hey guys, tonight we're heading deep into the humid heart of ancient Florida, long before Disney, before gators on golf courses, before Florida man was a punchline. Imagine the moon is a pale coin hanging low in the sky, lighting up a strange landscape of grassy humps that rise like sleeping giants. You're barefoot, stepping softly through sand that still remembers the footprints of people who walked here 5,000 years ago. The air is thick with jasmine and mystery. Somewhere nearby, a barred owl calls, and something in your gut says, you probably won't survive this if you aren't careful. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and the local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start at the foot of a mound, not a mountain, not a hill, just a surprisingly neat, perfectly sloped rise in the earth. And here's the thing, this thing wasn't made by nature. No, someone, actually, a lot of someones, piled up thousands of tons of earth, basket, by hand. For what? For who? Historians still argue whether these mounds were homes, temples, burial spots, or something else entirely. They're like prehistoric Swiss Army knives, used for a bit of everything, maybe even astronomy. You touch the soil. It's warm. Somewhere below, layers of compacted shells, sand, charcoal, and clay whisper stories in silence. You're standing on history, but not the kind you get from textbooks. These are the stories before stories, the first Floridians, who left no writing but somehow spoke volumes. Above you, the night thickens. Fireflies blink like a Morse code you can't quite crack. You squint. Is that a path curving up the mound? You climb slowly. It's not Everest, but your calves feel it. Near the top, you see it, a hollow in the center, maybe once a fire pit. Some of these mounds had wooden structures atop them, platform homes for elites, ceremonial lodges, maybe even schools for ancient wisdom. Suddenly, there's a scent in the air, smoky, sweet. Not real, just memory hanging like fog. You're smelling cedar, used in sacred fires. You're hearing drums, soft and steady, layered over the hum of insects. Some researchers suggest these mounds were aligned to solstices. Others claim they're engineered to echo certain sounds, like the stage of a natural amphitheater. No one can agree, but your bones say something powerful happened here. You sit. The breeze is light, but it carries tales. Down below, maybe there was a market once, trading fish, carved shells, woven mats. Above, elders watching, deciding, remembering. These weren't savages, despite what old books tried to claim. These were astronomers, city planners, gardeners of geometry. And they didn't just build one mound, there are thousands across Florida and the southeast. The one you're on might be part of a complex older than the pyramids. No joke. And here's the kicker, most people have no idea they exist. The names of the builders? Forgotten, overwritten, or never recorded. But their work, still here. Still massive. Still whispering through Spanish moss. You glance at the stars. Maybe one of the mounds in this region was built to line up with Orion, or the path of Venus. Maybe they tracked the rise and fall of water levels, or marked harvest seasons. Or maybe, just maybe, they built for reasons no modern person will ever fully grasp. That's part of the magic. A frog chirps, obnoxiously confident. You chuckle. It's good to laugh up here. The first Floridians probably did too. Sat on these heights, looked out over the treetops, and told their own jokes, maybe about the guy who forgot his basket of dirt or the kid who carved a lopsided turtle idol. And now, as your body eases into the rhythm of this ancient place, you begin to sense the patterns, a ring here, a ridge there, another mound rising in the distance. Not random. Never random. A design that your modern mind can't unsee once it starts to click. You lie back on the grass. It tickles. The sky above is clearer than you expect, almost too sharp. Somewhere behind your ear, a mosquito debates whether you're worth the effort. You're still, quiet, just listening. And you wonder, if you built something beautiful with no metal, no wheels, no cranes, just time and hands and community, how long would it last? Would people 5,000 years later lie here, thinking of you? They should. Because you didn't just pile dirt. You shaped sacred space. You carved permanence out of impermanence. You reached up with earth, toward the sky. You don't climb down right away. Instead, you sit at the edge of the mound, staring out into the shadowy stretch below where moonlight plays tricks in the underbrush. Then, you descend slowly, back to ground level, where the real magic happened, not in the heavens, but in the homes. You wander into what was once a village, one that might have buzzed with life just beyond the mound's base. Picture it, palm huts, each one shaped by hand and habit. Their roofs are steep, thatched with saw palmetto, thick enough to repel rain, thin enough to breathe. The walls? Woven fronds and upright poles, smeared with clay or just left open to the breeze. And tonight, you're stepping into one. You duck through a low entrance and suddenly you're inside a palm-thatched time capsule. It smells faintly like smoke and salt. There's no furniture, just mats woven from river reeds, some baskets, maybe a hammock strung low to the ground. A bit minimalist, sure, but charming. And functional. You sit on a mat that would have doubled as a seat, a bed, maybe even a baby sling. A small fire pit glows at the center, embers pulsing like a lazy heartbeat. The hut breathes with you, a draft's moving through the palm strips, casting flickers on the curved roof above. And here's your reality check: if you were a first Floridian and didn't know how to harvest palm fronds, shape saplings, or knot a loop tight enough to hold a roof beam, you'd be in serious trouble. No hut, no home. Even today, you'd be hard-pressed to replicate this shelter without YouTube tutorials or, Google. Yet for thousands of years, families built these structures season after season, each one a blend of architecture and intuition. Historians still argue whether these huts were communal or family-specific, or if the real living took place mostly outside under wide wooden awnings. But one thing's clear: they were cool in summer, warm in winter, and practically invisible to hostile eyes. You'd have walked right past them unless you were invited in. Inside, the fire is your kitchen, your light, your signal. It smells like sweetgrass and roasted shellfish. A mother hums a tune while crushing seeds in a stone bowl. A kid doodles in the ash with a charred stick. Nearby, a man strings a net, looping thread made from Spanish moss soaked and softened until it behaves like linen. His fingers work without thought, its muscle memory born of daily life and passed down like DNA. You lean back, and overhead you spot something curious, hanging bundles of herbs, tied with sinew, drying in the rafters. Medicine? Flavoring? Protection? Probably all three. Some bundles still cling to faint scents: bay, wild mint, something sharp and strange. Maybe it's the ancient Florida version of Febreze. There's a rhythm here. Morning, fish, clean, weave. Noon, nap, snack, mend. Evening, stories, laughter, fire. The hut isn't just a shelter, it's a microcosm. Life unfolds in soft loops, punctuated by seasons, floods, and the occasional panther prowl. And oh, the huts weren't randomly placed. Archaeologists suspect they formed arcs or spirals, aligning with celestial events or water access. Kids would have dashed between them barefoot, dodging dogs and younger siblings. Elder women probably kept order with nothing but a sharp eye and a sharper word. Every object inside the hut tells you something: a carved shell comb with delicate teeth, status symbol or just good grooming, a wooden bowl charred smooth from years of stew, and over there, yes, that's a toy. A small clay turtle, half the size of your palm. Someone made that for fun, for love. Outside, the air hums. You step out into the flickering courtyard, where other palm huts cast stubbled shadows. You imagine families sitting together, gnawing on fish bones, gossiping about rival clans, or reliving the drama of last week's alligator chase. And yes, gators were a problem, sometimes dinner, sometimes danger. Either way, they weren't ignored. You scratch your arm. The mosquitoes are relentless, as always. But guess what? The first Floridians had a trick: crocodile dung mixed with crushed herbs as bug repellent. Yep, that's not a joke. It may not make the best perfume, but it worked, sort of. Historians still argue whether it was for mosquitoes or for spiritual protection, but you're not about to test it either way. You circle another hut and spot a makeshift loom, vertical stakes with fibers stretched across like a primitive harp. Someone's midweave, the strands patterned in chevrons. Textiles didn't survive the centuries, but the impressions they left in clay did, ghosts of garments long rotted away. And you realize, these huts weren't primitive. They were smart. Renewable. Adaptable. They knew how to breathe, to shelter, to vanish. Hurricanes might tear through, but they'd rebuild. No FEMA, no blue tarps, just knowledge passed through calloused hands. A young girl with half her head shaved in the current style, trendy, apparently, balances a clay pot on her head with absolute grace. It's filled with water from a spring a half-mile away. She doesn't spill a drop. Meanwhile, an old man carves a wooden fishhook and mutters about how the young don't fish like they used to. Some things never change. And now, night deepens. You sit near the fire one last time, listening to crickets and crackling wood. Smoke curls up into the stars. Palm leaves rustle. The hut feels alive, part tree, part tent, part memory. These homes were never meant to last forever. But the knowledge to make them? That lasted longer than stone, longer than metal, maybe even longer than memory itself. You wake to a sound, wet, slapping, rhythmic. At first, you think it's rain. But no. You shuffle closer and peer through a break in the palms. It's a feast. Or the aftermath of one. The air smells like brine and firewood, and the sound? That's someone chucking oyster shells onto a midden heap. You've officially arrived at the trash pile, but this is no ordinary dump. You're staring at the bony backbone of a seafood empire. See, long before refrigeration, long before plastic-wrapped fillets in supermarket freezers, people along Florida's coasts were master gatherers of the ocean's gifts. Oysters, clams, whelks, scallops, the whole mollusk menu. Families gathered them in woven baskets, steamed them over hot coals, then ate with fingers and laughter. And when they were done, they tossed the shells into designated heaps. Over centuries, those heaps grew into middens, massive, layered mounds of shell, bone, charcoal, and the occasional broken tool. You're climbing one now. It crunches underfoot, slick with dew. Think of it like Florida's ancient landfills, except these heaps have outlived kingdoms. Some are over 30 feet high and stretch longer than football fields. They weren't just waste, they were memory. In fact, some researchers argue they served ceremonial or territorial functions too. Others insist they were more utilitarian. Historians still argue whether the largest shell mounds were sacred sites or accidental skyscrapers made of leftovers. At the top, you get a better view. The coastline twinkles with firelight, other camps, other clans. You smell smoked mullet. Someone nearby is roasting it with wild onion. And yes, it's as mouth-watering as it sounds. You sit on the shell mound and run your hand through the layers. Here's a bit of turtle shell, darkened by flame. There a stingray spine, razor-sharp even now. And, whoa, is that a shark tooth? Looks like it. Worn smooth, maybe worn as a pendant once. Jewelry from Jaws. A nice touch. Below you, a group of women are gutting fish with practiced speed, their tools flint-sharp and fingers faster than your Wi-Fi. They joke with one another, something about a cousin who tried to flirt with a girl from the inland mound village and got a face full of crab for his efforts. Again, some things never change. And the kids? Oh, they're everywhere. Racing up and down the midden, turning it into a game. One little guy pretends he's a sea monster, his shell-covered arms flailing as he growls at a giggling crowd. You laugh. Then flinch when you nearly step on a razor clam. These mounds could bite back. Over time, some of these shell heaps were built up intentionally. Flat platforms added. Edges sculpted. In places like Mound Key in Estero Bay, entire island settlements rose from discarded shells, stacked and arranged with mathematical precision. It wasn't just recycling, it was urban planning. Imagine living on a man-made island where every step you take crunches with the sound of ancient meals. Every home, pathway, and council hall resting atop generations of culinary history. You'd be walking on your ancestors' dinners. Literally. The quirky bit? The smell. Archaeologists say some middens still carry faint scents, especially after rain. A mix of salt, calcium, and whatever fermented in the sun 2,000 years ago. It's the original ode to coastal civilization. Not quite Chanel, but memorable. Night falls harder now, and you watch as a group of men shoulder torches and head toward the tidal flats. They're going shrimping. They wear palm fiber belts with pouches and nets looped over one shoulder. Their footsteps splash softly in the marsh. You follow, quietly. At the edge of the water, they wait. One dips his torch low, drawing silverfish toward the light. Another swings a net like he's casting a spell. Splash! Success! The catch wriggles in the net, tails flicking sparks into the air. You glance behind. The huge mound glowing in torchlight? That's not just garbage. It's culture, concentrated. A calendar, a cookbook, a cemetery, a museum. In the soft mud at its base, archaeologists have found bone needles, charred corn kernels, and even the remains of dogs, beloved pets or sacred sacrifices, depending on who you ask. And those dogs? They were small, loyal, maybe a bit smelly. Kind of like now. One of them trots past you, tail wagging, clearly looking for dropped shrimp. You scratch his head and he snorts approvingly. Farther down the coast, you hear drumming. Slow, steady. A celebration? A storm warning? No one sure. But music, like the shell mounds, lingers long after its makers are gone. You sit in the sand now, beside the shell pile, as the tide rolls in and whispers at your ankles. This world wasn't a primitive struggle. It was rich. Dynamic. The sea fed its people, and the people answered by shaping the sea's gifts into architecture. Into ancestry. As you doze, the breeze carries voices, soft, rhythmic, and very old. They're telling you something. Not in words, but in sounds, clatter of shells, hiss of fire, hush of tides. A lullaby of a life once lived right here, right now. And beneath you? Thousands of lives. Thousands of meals. Thousands of moments that built the very ground you're lying on. You're awake before sunrise this time. The sky is still wrapped in indigo, the stars reluctant to leave. You stretch, bones popping like twigs, and notice something else just beyond the shell mound's shadow, a raised line of earth. Not a mound this time, but something longer, broader, more deliberate. A ridge. You follow it. It stretches like a finger across the damp landscape, curving slightly, as if it's pointing at something just over the horizon. And suddenly, the thought hits, this isn't random. You're walking across someone's blueprint, 1,000s of years old. The builders before the builders, as some archaeologists half-jokingly call them. We're not talking about the famous Hopewell or Mississippians here. This goes back even farther, to cultures whose names we don't even really know. Maybe we call them the archaic peoples. Maybe we don't call them anything, because calling something means we've pinned it down, and these people. They are slippery. But their work? Oh, it's anything but vague. You crest another ridge, again, human-made, and look out over a complex of earthworks. They form rings, lines, even geometric shapes if you squint and know what you're looking for. In places like Watson Break in Louisiana and the less famous, but equally mind-bending mounds in northern Florida, these patterns suggest planning. Vision. Community coordination on a massive scale. Historians still argue whether these early mound complexes were seasonal gathering places, permanent towns, or ritual centers. but the sheer volume of dirt moved, hundreds of thousands of basket loads, tells you these weren't bored wanderers. These were organized folks with a serious work ethic. And here's the kicker, this all predates Stonehenge. Some of these mounds were active before the pyramids had even cleared zoning. Your history books probably skipped that part. Too inconvenient, maybe. You sit on a raised platform and think, why build like this? It wasn't just for flood protection, although that was likely part of it. And it wasn't just status symbols, though, yeah, being the family who lived on top of a 20-foot-high mound probably earned you serious clout. Some researchers suggest astronomical alignments. Others lean toward ritual processions, where people would walk from one mound to another in a specific order, like an earthy liturgy. There's even a theory that some of these massive constructions, like those in the Lake Jackson and Crystal River areas, were acoustically tuned. Designed so that speech or drumming at one end could be heard clearly across the space. You test this with a quiet clap. Nothing but frog replies. But still, it's a thought. You pass a spot where the grass changes subtly in color and density. This is where one of the builder pits was found, depressions where soil was scooped, mixed, moved. Archaeologists found no signs of domesticated animals doing the heavy lifting. That means every ounce of this monumental landscape was carried by human hands. Calloused, patient hands. You imagine them now, a line of workers, baskets strung from their shoulders, wet soil dripping onto bare legs. Children helping, playing, running between mounds like it's recess. Maybe someone sings to keep the rhythm. Maybe someone else is carving tally marks into a post, tracking progress. You chuckle. First project manager in the Americas? Could be. And you know what's wild? These earthworks were built without metal tools, without wheels, and, gasp, without written blueprints. They relied on memory, on markers, on oral instruction. You miss one key measurement, and boom, you've got a lopsided ceremonial plaza. Embarrassing. You spot a carving, faint, almost rubbed smooth by rain and time. It might be an animal. It might be a symbol. Or it might be you imagining things, seeing faces in clouds and meaning in mud. But it feels important. Like a signature. Near the center of this complex, you find a flat plaza. Historians debate whether this was a dance floor, a marketplace, or a site for ritual games. One quirky theory? A type of religious kickball. No proof. Just possibility. But wouldn't that be something? You sit and listen to the wind push through sore grass. The place is quiet, but not silent. It's layered with echoes. A baby's cry. A flute made of river cane. A scolding elder. Laughter. You don't see bones or treasures. This wasn't a graveyard. It was for the living, for their gatherings, their stories, their dramas. One archaeologist called these mound sites theaters of memory. Not a bad phrase. You imagine a storyteller standing at the center, spinning myths under the stars, kids leaning in, wide-eyed. Some of these stories survive in fragments, tales recorded much later by neighboring tribes, passed down through generations of smoke and sweat and song. There's one about a serpent that lives beneath the earth, another about a girl who married the wind. Are these metaphors for mounds? For weather? For flood cycles? Again, we don't know. But they knew. And they passed it on. You lie back in the grass, staring up. You trace the curve of a mound against the fading stars and try to align it with something, Orion, maybe. Or Venus. Or that big mosquito buzzing way too close to your ear. You swat. Miss. Still, the feeling lingers. These were not accidental civilizations. These were not flukes. They were planned. Led. Deep. Just because they didn't leave golden thrones or marble columns doesn't mean they didn't shape the land with brilliance. And they shaped you, in a way. Because now you know they existed. And you'll never look at a strange hill the same way again. The sun's up now, painting the wetlands gold. You're squinting through the reeds at a slow, narrow stream, and there, gliding like a prehistoric whisper, is a canoe. Dugout. Hollowed by fire, shaped with stone tools, and still floating after who knows how many centuries of tradition. You step closer. One wrong move and, yep, your shoes full of swamp. Classic. But it's worth it. Because this isn't just a boat. It's a time machine, carved from a single cypress trunk. And the person in it? He's about your age, maybe younger, knees bent just so, long paddle slicing the water like a blade through silk. He nods at you, cool, casual, and keeps going, his canoe barely making a ripple. You've got to respect the vibe. This, right here, is how the first Floridians moved, by water. Roads? Optional. Waterways? Essential. Florida's original highways were blue and brackish, winding through mangroves, swamps, and open bays. Dugout canoes were as common then as cars are now, and arguably more eco-friendly. Some have been found perfectly preserved in the muck, oldest one dated over 6,000 years ago, found near Newnan's Lake. That's older than most pyramids, older than writing, older than your favorite conspiracy theory. And here's the wild part, these weren't just tree trunks with attitude. They were finely crafted. Some stretched over 20 feet, designed for hauling nets, baskets, families, even dogs. Others were short and nimble, perfect for fishing in narrow marshes. Historians still argue whether the canoes were made by fire alone or if they used stone tools to scrape, shape, and polish them into sleek, water-gliding perfection. You trail the paddler through cattails, trying not to trip over a submerged log. Along the banks, you notice more signs of life, fish traps. Genius things, really. Simple constructions of stakes and woven reeds, arranged in funnel shapes. Fish swim in with the tide, can't find their way out, and boom, dinner. You crouch next to one that's still half standing, and you can imagine the trap setter, ankle deep in mud, checking it each morning like a mailbox. What did we get? Catfish? Tilapia? The occasional surprise turtle? And here's something quirky, some traps weren't just made for fish. There's fringe speculation that some configurations may have been used to herd eels. Eels? The slippery, bitey kind. Not a huge part of dinner today, but back then? Protein is protein, and an eel is a long, nutritious noodle if you know what you're doing. You find a canoe pulled ashore, smaller than the one you saw earlier, its hull blackened from the shaping fires. You run your hand along its side. It's smooth, cool. There's a faint carved mark near the prow, maybe a clan symbol, or just someone showing off their carving skills. Either way, it's art on a vehicle. Classy. Farther along the bank, you stumble into a camp. Nets drying on wooden racks. A woman peeling bark fibers, twisting them into cord. A boy slapping fish on flat stones to loosen scales. Everything in motion. Everything with purpose. You ask yourself, how long would you last out here without GPS or granola bars? Be honest. But these folks? They knew every bend in the creek, every tide turn, every fish behavior. They read water the way you read memes, constantly, obsessively, instinctively. You sit near the fire where a man stirs something in a shell bowl, fish stew, heavy on wild herbs and maybe a dash of sass. He nods at you, like yes, this is the best thing you'll smell all day, and he's not wrong. He points with his paddle to a distant cluster of mangroves. We go there next moon, he says softly. Clam beds. Deep water. You nod, like you know what that means, and smile. He grins back, kindly. You're clearly the tourist here, but at least you're trying. You learn, watching, the canoes are patched with resin. The paddles are carved with care, not just for function but beauty. Some are adorned with feathers, shells, tiny etchings that mean something personal. Transportation wasn't just practical. It was intimate. It was identity. One boy, maybe 6 or 7, is learning to paddle in a tiny training canoe, basically a floating log. He grunts as he overcorrects, spins in circles, and gets cheered on by a half-dozen aunties. You cheer too. It's adorable. He grins proudly through the splash marks on his face. By mid-morning, the camp is busy again. Canoes get loaded. Nets get folded. Everything's tied down with knots you don't even recognize. You try one and it immediately comes undone. Embarrassing. But hey, that's how you learn, right? There's a moment where you look out over the still water, and you see it clearly. This isn't a primitive world. It's a water world. A culture of flow, of patience, of knowing that the river always returns and the tide always shifts. And for the first Floridians, life was lived in motion, coasting through mangroves, harvesting with the moon, navigating not just space but time itself by water and willpower. You dip your fingers into the stream. It's cold, alive. You wonder if this exact water kissed the prow of a canoe 1,000 years ago. Probably. Florida's water remembers. You're drifting now, mentally, maybe even spiritually, as you follow the ancient canoe paths deeper inland. The air thickens with the scent of cypress and peat, and the land flattens into marshy expanse. But suddenly, it all shifts. Under your feet, the ground firms up. It's dry. It's patterned. It's strange. You blink, unsure at first, but there's no mistaking it. The earth here is sculpted. Curved berms snake around you. Ditches form rings, half-moons, spirals. And it's no accident. You've stumbled into sacred geometry, swamp edition. These formations don't rise high like the mounds. They ripple low and wide, barely noticeable unless you're looking from above. Or unless you're walking them, like now. Step by step, you're tracing a design older than memory and more confusing than your last tax form. Some of these earthworks span hundreds of feet across. Concentric rings, long ridges, and straight lines stretching like they're trying to touch the stars. Archaeologists found one in Florida called the Fort Center Complex, where circular ditches surrounded wooden platforms. Others dot the state, especially around Belle Glade and Ortona. Not tourist hotspots, but they should be. You follow a spiral path, and the world starts to hush. There's something meditative about it. You're moving inward, drawn by design. It's a layout that suggests ceremony, rhythm, maybe even music. Historians still argue whether these structures were temples, calendars, or a wild idea, amphitheaters built for sound. That's right, some scholars think the shapes amplified voices or instruments. Imagine standing at the center of a ring, whispering a chant that echoes perfectly through the ditch system, bouncing off palm trunks, vibrating into the night. It's prehistoric surround sound. No Bluetooth required. You reach the center and stop. It's quiet. Like a held breath. There's no altar, no statue, no bones. Just space. And yet, your skin prickles. Something happened here, again and again and again. And it wasn't just for looks. The layout might have been functional too. Some of these ridges may have helped manage seasonal floods. Others lined up with solstice sunrises. The land here is flat as a whisper, so even the subtlest rise could have meant the difference between dry feet and swamp-soaked regret. You kneel down and press your palm to the earth. Warm. Firm. Not random. Someone packed this soil with purpose, layer by layer, shaping meaning into mud. Nearby, you spot a post hole. Just a dark circle in the sand, but it speaks volumes. A wooden pillar once stood there, maybe part of a platform, or a marker, or something else entirely. Wood doesn't survive here unless it's submerged, but these shadows in the dirt? They're like fingerprints. A kid darts past you, barefoot, laughing, chasing a heron that's definitely not interested in being friends. His trail curves through the rings like he's solving a maze. You wonder if he even knows the geometry he's running through, or if it's just part of the landscape to him. Like hills. Or clouds. And then, just off the main circle, you find something odd, a small mound with carved stakes arranged like spokes in a wheel. No one's quite sure what this is. Some say it's a calendar, marking moon phases. Others think it was a kind of council ring, Or maybe it was where kids got told off for stealing extra smoked fish. Who knows? One quirky tidbit: some of these earthworks include spirals that curl clockwise or counterclockwise. Was that symbolic? Did they believe one direction brought luck, and the other, storms? Or was it just an artistic flourish? The prehistoric equivalent of it looked cool. Again, debate rages on. You step back, trying to see the whole picture. But on foot, it's impossible. You'd need a drone, or a hot air balloon, or maybe just a really friendly pelican. Still, the design whispers itself into your memory. You'll dream in curves tonight. You pass two women painting their faces with crushed berries and clay. The colors aren't just for looks, they mean something. Status, age, maybe mood. Maybe just Tuesday. One woman dots her forehead in a pattern that echoes the spiral earthwork you just walked. She catches you staring, winks, and goes back to her reflection in a pool of water. As the sun rises higher, the shadows shift. Suddenly, you see alignments that weren't visible before, lines pointing to distant mounds, arcs catching the light just so. It's a solar choreography you weren't invited to but get to witness anyway. And you think, how many hours, how many generations, did it take to maintain this? To teach the children why the curves mattered, to rebuild after floods, to remember the pattern long after the original shaper had returned to the soil? You sit beneath a wax myrtle and exhale. The geometry doesn't shout. It doesn't flash or dazzle. It hums. Softly. Like background music for a very old, very complicated dance. A dance you're just beginning to learn. By midday, the sun is relentless, and your skin feels like it's being slow-roasted in gator oil. You retreat into a shady grove where palmettos rattle and something chirps from a hollow tree. But just as you're catching your breath, you spot a group ahead, sitting together, half in sun, half in shadow. At first, it's their jewelry that grabs you. Then, you see their heads. Elongated. Not grotesquely so, just different. Smooth, intentional. Their foreheads slope back in a way that modern skulls simply don't. And you realize, you're looking at cranial modification. Prehistoric body art at its boldest. Don't freak out, it's not aliens. It's science. And culture. See, some first Floridian groups practiced intentional head shaping, binding infant skulls with soft cloth or wooden boards to coax their craniums into graceful slopes over time. Painful? Maybe. But effective? Absolutely. Historians still argue whether cranial modification marked social class, tribal identity, or just a prevailing beauty standard. Was it spiritual? A status symbol? The original flex? No one's sure. But one thing's certain, it was deliberate. You don't just accidentally reshape a skull. You sit near a young woman with the classic elongated shape and an even more eye-catching accessory, a necklace made entirely of shark teeth. They clink gently as she moves, like prehistoric wind chimes. She catches your glance and lifts her chin proudly. This isn't a costume. This is who she is. And it's not just teeth. People around her wear beads carved from conch, armbands of polished shell, even earrings made from bird bones. You see patterns, zigzags, spirals, lightning shapes, all likely full of meaning. Tattoos wind around arms and legs, inked with crushed charcoal and fish oil, fading into the skin like secret maps. You reach for your wrist instinctively, where your smartwatch would be. But there's no time here, just sun and shadow, rhythm and ritual. Someone nearby starts singing, a low, melodic hum. Not words you understand, but the kind you feel in your sternum. Others join in. It's not a performance. It's life. A child dances to the rhythm, spinning in slow circles, arms raised. You notice his hair is partially shaved, another style marker. And those eyes? Lined with a dark pigment that might have doubled as sun protection. Forget store-bought sunscreen, try crushed walnut mixed with alligator dung. Not a joke. That stuff worked. Sort of. Probably smelled like death, though. The kid bumps into an elder who's carefully chipping away at a shell. You lean closer and see it's a comb. Not just functional, but beautiful. It's carved with symmetrical teeth and an image of what looks like a stylized heron, head bowed, legs bent just so. Hair care and art combined. You imagine losing it in the mud and crying for a week. One of the men calls out and lifts a mask. Wood, carved smooth and painted with ochre and charcoal. It's shaped like a bird, long beak, hollow eyes. He places it over his face and becomes something else. Maybe a dancer. Maybe a spirit. Maybe both. These people lived in layers, physical, symbolic, spiritual. Every adornment had a meaning. Every pattern whispered stories. And every story was worn with pride. You're handed a mirror of polished copper, imported, probably, from far-off trade routes that reached well beyond Florida. It's dented, tarnished, but your reflection shimmers faintly in it. And just for fun, you try to imagine what you'd look like with a modified skull and a six-tooth shark jaw bracelet. Honestly? You could pull it off. The community's artisans are gathered nearby. One woman scrapes pigment from a lump of red ochre. Another melts resin for beadwork. A young boy tests the balance of a decorated spear with feathers tied below the stone tip. Everything here says, we are more than survivors. We are stylists. Curators. Expressionists. You wander past a makeshift market stall where items are laid on a woven mat. Trade is quiet but steady, 2 shells for a fish hook, a bracelet for a scrap of colorful fabric, maybe imported from a tribe up north. Florida wasn't isolated. It was connected. A place where ideas flowed with the tides. One particularly curious find catches your eye, a carved figurine, small enough to fit in your palm. It's got a human body but an owl's head. Big eyes. Wings outstretched. Historians still argue whether these hybrid figures were gods, jokes, or metaphors. You like to think it's a little of all three. You rest near the fire where a group's talking. You don't understand the words, but the gestures are familiar. Laughter. Teasing. Eye rolls that transcend millennia. You lean back and breathe deep. The sun glints off a woman's necklace, bones, shells, teeth, copper. It tells a story you don't quite grasp, but you respect it anyway. Every piece a sentence. Every sentence a memory. These weren't crude people. They were curated. Considered. And not because someone told them to be, but because the world, their world, was worth embellishing. Worth adorning. Worth celebrating. And as you drift off under the fluttering shadows of palm fronds and shark-tooth earrings, you realize, style is eternal. And some of the first fashionistas? They walked these swamps in bare feet and brilliance. The mood shifts with the light. By late afternoon, golden rays cut long shadows through the trees, and the laughter fades to murmurs. You follow a procession now, quiet feet moving in a slow, deliberate line through knee-high grass. No one speaks. You barely breathe. This, you realize, is not celebration. It's ceremony. The line winds toward a clearing where a low mound rises, soft-edged and blanketed in woven mats. This isn't one of the towering earthworks, it's humbler, tucked into the land like a secret. But the energy around it? Heavy. Sacred. You've entered the realm of the dead. A man at the front of the line carries a bundle in his arms, tightly wrapped, cradled with the reverence you'd give a newborn. Only this bundle isn't arriving. It's departing. They're bringing an ancestor home. You hang back, watching from the edge as they lower the bundle into a hollow at the top of the mound. Others step forward to place offerings, a carved turtle shell, a string of beads, a small wooden mask. Each item tells a story. Each gesture echoes through the hush. This is a burial, yes, but it's also something more. A reunion. A return. For the first Floridians, death wasn't a vanishing act. It was a shift in presence, from seen to unseen, from breath to breeze. Historians still argue whether burial mounds like these were used solely for the elite or if all members of the community were given such care. The variety across sites suggests both, some elaborate, some spare, all deeply intentional. You walk quietly around the mound's base. Embedded in its slope are fragments, bones, yes, but also pottery shards, smoothed stones, pieces of coral. You wonder if each object had a name once. A purpose. A place in someone's story. Nearby, a woman weaves a basket, not from habit, but from memory. It's for the burial. A final gift. She works quickly but carefully, her fingers nimble with knowledge passed down through generations. The basket's lid will be tied with river grass and pressed with a handprint before it's placed beside the wrap body. And then there are the bones. Human remains found in similar mounds often show signs of deliberate arrangement, skulls grouped, long bones stacked, sometimes coated with red ochre. Some were buried fresh. Others were cleaned and bundled after time above ground. Historians call it secondary burial. You might call it a final edit. But one thing is clear, the dead were not discarded. They were cared for, included, remembered. You step to the side and almost stumble over a stone circle, not large, just a ring of rocks barely higher than your ankle. A boundary, maybe. A marker. Or something else entirely. No one explains it. No one has to. You feel it in your chest, don't step inside. So you don't. One elder smears ash on his face, drawing a line from forehead to chin. The gesture is old, reflexive. Maybe it's protection. Maybe it's mourning. Or maybe it's both. And then you see it, a mask, lying beside the mound, carved from wood so smooth it gleams even in the low light. It's shaped like a human face but exaggerated, high cheekbones, a stretched smile, eyes like hollow seeds. Someone wore this. Danced in it. Grieved in it. You reach out, then stop. Some things you observe. Others, you leave untouched. There's talk of alligators, whispered low. Not the ones that lurk in the reeds, but spiritual ones. Guardians of the underworld. Creatures that ferry souls between realms. One story says the dead ride on an alligator's back, across black water, to a village where ancestors wait with open arms. You look at the river and imagine it, quiet ripples, ancient eyes above the surface, and a soul curled up between scaled shoulders. The air cools. A wind stirs the moss. You shiver, not from cold, but from weight. This moment isn't yours. You're borrowing it. You crouch by a smaller mound, barely noticeable, and see the imprint of a basket long gone, just a faint shape in the soil. And next to it, a child's toy. A clay bird. Its wings broken. Its eyes still staring skyward. And here's the thing, these mounds weren't isolated. They were part of life's map. Some were built in clusters, near homes, near rivers, near trade routes. Others stood alone, sentinel-like. And some even got reused, generation after generation. Like sacred ground that kept getting more sacred. You hear a drumbeat, soft, slow, like a heartbeat. It doesn't signal dancing this time. It marks transition. You watch as the group disperses, some weeping, others silent, some with heads high. They leave not with finality, but with recognition. They've done what was needed. As you sit at the base of the mound, twilight settling in, you feel a connection not just to the people, but to their faith in continuity. In the idea that no one truly disappears. That the earth holds memory. That burial is not goodbye, it's see you again, just not yet. The wind sighs through the trees. The mound sits still. And beneath it, someone rests, not alone, not forgotten. You wake with a crick in your neck and sand in your ear. It's dawn again, mist curling over the water, birds fluting their early songs like they're warming up for an avian orchestra. You stretch, shake out your limbs, and start walking. The burial mound fades behind you, swallowed by palms and memory. But you're not leaving the past, not really. Because now you're headed to where the sand speaks. Not metaphorically, Literally. You arrive at a low, sandy ridge, seemingly unremarkable, the kind of place you'd speed past on your way to a gas station with cheaper beef jerky. But this? This is a treasure chest hiding in plain sight. Welcome to Windover. Or at least, a site like it. Windover Pond, discovered in the 1980s near Titusville, revealed one of the most astonishing archaeological finds in North America, a peat bog filled with remarkably preserved human remains, over 160 bodies, some dating back more than 7,000 years. That's older than the pyramids. Older than metal tools. Older than the concept of Florida itself. And what made it even wilder? The brains. Yes, actual brain tissue survived in some of the skulls, thanks to the oxygen-free muck that hugged and protected them. Historians still argue whether this level of preservation was a fluke or if these people knew how the bog worked. Either way, the results were chilling, in a good way. You step closer to the edge of a similar pond, careful not to slip. The surface is glassy, with a strange green sheen. It looks calm. Harmless. But under that still water lies a library. One of bones. Of baskets. Of ancient knowledge accidentally sealed in amber. Archaeologists working sites like this don't dig so much as they whisper. They brush. They coax. And the sand, once disturbed, tells them everything, where someone knelt, where a fire once burned, where a child dropped a toy and never picked it up again. You crouch near a square of turned soil. It looks like nothing. Just a patch of slightly darker earth. But someone trained sees layers. Carbon stains equals old hearth. Charred bone fragments equals dinner or ritual. A streak of rust equals the trace of a tool that rotted away long ago. This kind of archaeology is a bit like reading smoke signals written in dirt. Slow, careful, and weirdly poetic. And then there are the surprises, like the burial cloths found at Windover, woven from plant fibers with astonishing complexity. Or the preserved brain matter, still offering up secrets about diet, disease, and even DNA. One quirky detail? Scientists believe some of the people buried there were left-handed, based on muscle asymmetry in their bones. That's right. Lefties repping since the Archaic period. You walk past a line of flagged stakes, each marking a find. One marks a pile of turtle shells. Another? A stone tool so sharp it could still slice your thumb open. Don't ask how we know that. Okay, fine, an intern found out the hard way. Someone calls you over. An elder sits near a shallow pit where faint outlines of post holes dot the ground. He traces a line through the sand with a finger, connecting them. A circle. Maybe the footprint of a hut. Maybe a ceremonial structure. Maybe something in between. You imagine the scene long ago, smoke curling from a thatched roof, a child crying, a dog barking at birds, someone laughing just outside. All of it erased, except the stains. The elder points to a dark patch. Fire was here, he says. But also, story. And that's the thing. The sand doesn't just record facts. It remembers moments. It remembers rhythms. Farther off, someone gently sifts through layers of peat. They've uncovered a wooden stake, smooth and pointed, possibly ceremonial. Next to it, a child's burial, wrapped carefully, buried with a bone pin and a small carved effigy. You feel your chest tighten. The pin is delicate. The effigy? A stylized bird with its wings tucked in. Historians still argue whether these burials reflected status, belief systems, or just deeply personal grief. The care, though, is unmistakable. One researcher at Windover claimed the community buried their dead with the same methodical reverence seen in modern societies, no tossing, no chaos. Every grave had order. That alone shatters the myth of primitive man like a clay pot underfoot. As you walk the ridge, the sand shifts beneath you. Not in a spooky, sinkhole kind of way, but in a whispering way. Like it's asking, will you listen this time? You pause by a half-excavated canoe, still resting in the soil like a ribcage. Not grand. Not dramatic. just waiting. You imagine it slicing through this same water millennia ago, someone guiding it with purpose, unaware they'd end up in a podcast centuries later. The wind kicks up, and grains of sand pelt your arms. Each one, a time traveler. A fragment of something bigger. A record. You sit and press your hand into the dirt. And it presses back, not physically, but with memory. With presence. The sand speaks softly, but insistently. It says, we were here. We lived. We died. We built. We mourned. We sang. And the land? It remembers every note. The sun has dipped again, lazy and low, gilding the treetops like a slow leak of molten gold. You're walking through muck now, boots sinking with each step, following a narrow boardwalk that wasn't always here. Once upon a time, this was solid ground, or close enough. You duck under a drooping branch, and there it is. The cult of the carved wood. No, not a heavy metal band. Not exactly a cult, either. But something awfully close to sacred, strange, beautiful wooden effigies pulled from the muck like messages in a bottle. You step into a clearing surrounded by water and reeds. In the center, under a makeshift thatched awning, sits a log. A long, hollowed-out tree trunk. And inside it? Carvings. Faces. Eyes too wide, mouths agape, some bird-like, others eerily human. One has antlers. Another has a mouth like a fish. They're not just statues, they're statements. Emotional. Intentional. Possibly spiritual. Welcome to the realm of the Lake Jackson and Key Marco artifacts, sites where wood survived, where mud did something magical. It preserved belief. These wooden figures, some barely more than a foot tall, others rising like totems, aren't the work of idle hands. They were carved with care and buried in ritual places, wetlands, springs, edges of mounds. And the conditions of these bogs and swamps kept them intact for over 1,000 years. Historians still argue whether these figures were gods, guardians, ancestors, or actors in some long-forgotten myth. What they agree on is that no other region in North America has preserved so many wooden artifacts this old. Florida, of all places, turned out to be a memory vault. You crouch next to a carved figure set into the ground like it's growing from the earth. Its face is long, owl-like, with gouged-in eyes that stare at you in judgment or curiosity, or both. A child once might have left an offering here, a bead, a shell, a scrap of food. Something to earn protection. Or maybe forgiveness. And it's not just humanoid shapes. Some carvings depict animals, ibises with beaks that curl like question marks, frogs caught mid-leap, serpents twisting like smoke. The first Floridians didn't just carve what they saw, they carved what they felt. What they feared. What they hoped might listen. You run your fingers over a replica of a famous find from Key Marco, a seated figure with folded legs and an expression somewhere between serenity and dread. The original was made of buttonwood and survived because it was buried in constant moisture. Sunlight would have chewed it up in a year. But mud? Mud hugged it close. And that's the weird part, the best preserved spirituality in Florida came not from stone or gold, but from swamp and wood. Nature's filing cabinet. One quirky tidbit? A few of the wooden figures had holes in their backs, like they were worn as backpack gods. Others had sockets in their bases, maybe for inserting into poles or carrying in parades. Or, as one theory goes, they were floated on rafts during processions. Just picture it, a foggy dawn, a priest paddling a log canoe, a carved owl god staring out from the bow, mist curling like incense. You take that seriously. You step around the edge of the pond where more carvings are laid out, some half-submerged, others mounted for display. A woman dips a brush into linseed oil and gently applies it to a drying figure. The smell is sharp but oddly comforting. She's not preserving it for profit. She's preserving it for continuity. You sit beside her and watch as she reveals the wood grain, a texture like fingerprints, interrupted only by the chisel marks of someone who lived 1,000 years before either of you could spell Florida. Behind you, someone starts singing, a low, nasal tune with a repetitive, almost hypnotic rhythm. You can't tell if it's a chant or a lullaby. Maybe both. Several people join in, and suddenly the air feels thick again, not with heat, but with presence. You close your eyes, and the faces come alive. Not like jump scares, this isn't a horror movie. More like memories flickering behind your eyelids. You see a child carving a fish out of driftwood, tongue poking from the corner of his mouth. You see an elder shaping a bird god for the spring equinox, his hand shaking with age and reverence. You see belief. Not in the way we think of belief now, not doctrine or creed. This was closer to negotiation. You offered something, a carving, a dance, a drumbeat, and hoped the world responded. Not a yes. Not a no. Just a ripple. A sign. And even now, the carvings ripple. The swamp hums. The figures watch. Historians call this animism. Belief that all things carry spirit. That wood holds memory. That carving a shape is not just art, it's invitation. You rise and walk slowly through the figures, nodding to each. You don't know their names. You don't need to. They're not waiting for worship. They're just here. Like always. At the edge of the clearing, someone's carved a new figure, modern, but respectful. It's unfinished. One eye done, the other blank. The hand rests on its chest. It could be a tribute. It could be a continuation. Either way, it's honest. You touch it gently, and whisper, just in case. I see you. You leave the carved faces behind, though not really, they linger in your mind like old dreams. Their wide eyes seem to follow as you walk inland again, where the ground rises just enough to feel solid beneath your feet. Ahead, smoke curls skyward in thin grey ribbons. Drums? Maybe. Or just your heart picking up pace, because you've just stumbled into something bigger than worship or art. This is politics. No, not the kind with lawn signs or awkward debates about who forgot to bring guava root to the potluck. This is mound diplomacy, a world of gifts, status, alliances, and very careful power plays. You reach a clearing where two groups are gathered. Different patterns in their clothing. Different accents in their speech. One group wears more feathers. The other wears more copper. They're facing one another, not hostile, but not quite relaxed either. This is the tension of the handshake before the handshake. Between them sits a long mat woven with shell beads and dyed fibers. It's covered in offerings, dried fish, beads, carved tools, woven baskets. This isn't just generosity, it's messaging. Each gift whispers, we're worth knowing. Historians still argue whether these kinds of meetings were seasonal trade fairs, ritual alliances, or a blend of both. But what's clear is that they mattered. A lot. These mound-based societies weren't isolated villages. They were nodes in a dense web of influence. You didn't just survive by hunting and weaving. You survived by who you knew. And how well you navigated the unspoken rules. You settle into the background and watch the subtle performance unfold. One elder steps forward with a ceremonial pipe. It's offered, not lit. A test. A gesture. The other elder accepts it, holds it up, nods. A match. The air softens. The drummers resume. This is ancient diplomacy. And it works like jazz structure with a side of improvisation. These mound centers, like Lake Jackson or Crystal River, weren't just religious sites or places to throw fish feasts. They were hubs, places where leaders gathered, where marriages were arranged, where disputes were smoothed over with smoked fish and side-eye. You walk the perimeter and see more signs of subtle hierarchy. One man wears a woven sash embedded with rare shell discs. Those shells? Not local. Probably from the Gulf or even farther. Trade routes stretched from the Midwest to the Florida coast, zigzagging through forest and river. What did they trade? Copper. Mica. Shells. Feathers. Information. Probably gossip. 2. Let's be real. And while the grown-ups negotiate with calm intensity, the teenagers flirt awkwardly near the fire, sharing roasted tubers and side glances. Meanwhile, the kids run wild around a central mound, turning sacred architecture into a jungle gym. The mound doesn't mind. It's seen worse. You overhear a whisper: a certain family may marry their daughter to a chief's son from the Northern Ridge village. It's not about love. It's about alliance. If that happens, the shell road between the two territories will be open for another season. Wait, shell road? Yes, you heard that right. The first Floridians didn't just pile shells for fun. They built roads with them, long, deliberate paths paved in white fragments that crunched underfoot and caught moonlight like breadcrumbs. These roads connected mound sites like arteries, facilitating trade, migration, and ceremony. One quirky theory? Some of these shell roads were also processional, used for specific events, walked only during rituals, perhaps even aligned with certain stars. Was your big wedding march also a low-key astronomy project? Could be. You kneel and scoop up a handful of crushed shell from the path. It glitters in the light. You wonder how many feet have walked this very path, carrying baskets of goods or messages of peace, or perhaps a warning. And here's the thing, none of this was casual. These exchanges were calculated. Gift giving had rules. Give too much? You look desperate. Give too little? You look cheap. It was a social economy, built not just on trade goods, but on respect and reciprocity. One elder tells a story of a man who brought 2 eels and no berries to a spring council. He wasn't invited back. You chuckle. Then pause. Because this world, this network of diplomacy and ceremony, is a mirror. We think we invented politics, trade routes, and strategic alliances. We didn't. We inherited them. You watch as a young woman performs a dance between the delegations. Her feet trace a spiral pattern in the dirt. She carries no weapon, but she carries power, her presence commanding attention. Is she a priestess? A princess? A trained diplomat cloaked in rhythm? When she finishes, silence. Then applause, not with hands, but with feet, stomping softly. Agreement reached. Terms accepted. Or at least enough to avoid a scene. As dusk descends, gifts are exchanged. One group leaves with smoked mullet. The other leaves with copper pins and stories to retell. A bird circles overhead, and you wonder what it sees. A gathering? A negotiation? A dance of survival? You sit on the steps of a low mound and breathe in the cooling air. This wasn't a primitive world. This was a high-stakes game of influence, played with shells instead of gold, gestures instead of signatures. And it worked. Because tonight, no blood was shed. Only promises. Darkness settles like velvet across the landscape, and the stars come out, slowly at first, then all at once. You lie on your back, staring up at the sky, belly full from someone's leftover smoked mullet and head spinning with the unshakable feeling that everything means more than it seems. And then you see it. A pale path, nearly glowing in the moonlight, cutting across the land in a gentle arc. At first, you think it's a creek bed. Then a footpath. But no. You sit up and walk to it, and your shoes crunch. Shells. Crushed shells packed tight into the earth, forming a road. A road to the stars. This is no accident. It stretches longer than you can see, curving subtly as though it's pointing not just toward another village, but toward something in the heavens. You follow it, your feet slipping a bit on the smooth oyster fragments. The road has a rhythm, crunch, crunch, pause. A song you didn't know you remembered. Historians have documented shell roads across Florida, often linking mound centers and water access points. But some? Some seem to go nowhere. Or at least, not somewhere obvious. Which raises the question, were they purely practical? Or were they celestial? Historians still argue whether certain shell roads were aligned with constellations, seasonal star risings, or solstice points. Did the ancients build them to walk toward the dawn on the longest day of the year? Or were they pathways for spirits, roads not of earth, but of sky? You reach a spot where the road bends slightly. There's a clearing here, with 3 upright stones, not towering monoliths, just humble markers. You line them up, and there. Orion's belt. Clear as day. Well, night. Coincidence? You could argue that. Or you could recognize the possibility that this wasn't just a trail, but a timeline. A cosmic calendar you could walk on. One quirky detail? In some communities, the shell road was raked daily, cleared of debris by designated keepers. Not just to keep it nice, but to maintain its visibility from the sky. Like a signal to the stars that someone down here was paying attention. You keep walking. The night is alive. Crickets pulse. A whippoorwill whistle somewhere nearby. Fireflies blink like punctuation in a sentence you don't know how to read. The shell road curves again, and you see it lead to a mound. Of course. Not just any mound. This one's taller, with steps carved into its face. Ceremonial, clearly. At the top, you sit. The shell road behind you glows faintly. Before you, the stars shimmer, familiar, ancient, unknowable. Beside you sits a man wrapped in a woven cloak threaded with reflective bits of mica. He nods toward the sky and begins drawing shapes in the dirt with a stick. A turtle. A bird. A man holding a bow. Constellations. Stories. Directions. Road is not just a village, he says. Road is to here. He taps his chest. Then the sky. A direct line between memory and meaning. He explains, slowly, patiently, that each shell in the road was chosen, placed, sometimes even blessed. Children weren't allowed to run on it unless invited. Travelers would pause at certain bends to offer thanks or ask permission. You think about all the roads you've walked in your life. Asphalt. Gravel. Concrete. None of them felt sacred. This one does. You walk back down, slow and reverent. The road makes soft music beneath your feet. And you start to see it differently now, as a thread, stitching together villages, people, ceremonies, stars. A trail worn by time, lit by memory. And the stars? They're watching. You can feel it. Some stories claim ancestors became stars. Others say the stars are gods watching the earth. Either way, this road connects them. At a bend in the path, you find a small altar, just 3 stones, a few feathers, and a piece of charred wood. A child's toy lies beside it. A carved bird, wings outstretched. Someone stood here once. Looked up. And asked a question. You do the same. No answer comes. Just a breeze. Just a ripple in the firefly light. Just a shell under your heel, shifting. You reach the end of the visible road, but you know it goes farther. Buried now. Forgotten. Or simply waiting. Because some roads never truly disappear. They just wait for someone to walk them again. The stars are fading now. Not vanishing, but softening, pulled back behind morning's curtain. You can smell rain in the distance. Not yet falling, but coming. Always coming. And that's the thing about Florida. You can build a mound, carve a canoe, pave a road to Orion, but the weather does not care. You're standing in what was once a village, huts, mounds, fish traps, all of it. Now it's just shoreline. The sea laps at your ankles. A few stakes poke out of the water like broken fingers. The rest? Gone. Swept away. Hurricanes and history's amnesia. It hits you, slowly at first. The idea that entire civilizations here were erased not by war, not by disease, at least not yet, but by weather. Brutal, indifferent, and fast. Historians and archaeologists know the signs: scatterings of pottery far from known settlements, layers of silt over charred hearths, sudden cessations of occupation at mound sites. What happened? Likely storms. Big ones. Entire barrier islands were swallowed. Freshwater springs turned salty. What was once home became sea. You walk past a patch of beach where the sand is studded with tiny bones. Not human. Bird, probably. Crabs. Some turtle. All washed inland or left behind when the water receded. You find a scallop shell with a hole punched near the top. Jewelry, maybe. Now just another forgotten accessory on the edge of the tide. One quirky discovery? At certain sites, archaeologists found stacked baskets of food, corn, shellfish, dried meat, preserved in mud under collapsed shelters. It's possible they were emergency stores, last-minute prep before a storm. Did they plan to return? Did they run out of time? You imagine the warnings: the air goes still. Birds vanish. The tide pulls back a little too far. Everyone looks at each other. No one speaks. Then chaos. People grab baskets, children, spears. Canoes are shoved into the water. Elders are carried. Fires are left burning. And above it all, the sky cracks open, not just rain, but rage. Storm surge flattens huts. Wind snap palm trunks like matchsticks. Mounds wash out. The shell roads vanish beneath sand and brine. Days later, weeks maybe, survivors return, if they can. And what's left? Maybe a fragment of pottery. Maybe nothing. You stand on a rise and try to picture the village that was here. A ring of palm huts. A mound. A communal hearth. All gone. You squint. There's a low hump in the sand, barely noticeable. Could be natural. Could be a memory. Historians still argue whether the repeated disappearance of settlements here was due to singular catastrophic events or a pattern of slow erosion. It might not matter. For the people who lived it, it felt like the end. And then come the stories. Myths fill the void where memory drowns. One tells of a sea serpent that grew jealous of land and swallowed villages in its coils. Another speaks of a woman who danced too close to the shore, summoning a god who swept her people away. Warnings, perhaps. Or metaphors for something no one could control. You wade into the shallows and find a wooden post sticking up. Not driftwood. It's carved. You run your fingers over the grooves. It's part of a fish weir, maybe centuries old. Still here. Barely. The preservation is eerie. Florida's waters can destroy, but they can also protect. In places, peat bogs and brackish ponds have wrapped their arms around the past and refused to let go. But not always. Not often. You turn inland and see a mound in the distance, still standing. Grass covered. Silent. A survivor. How many storms has it weathered? 10? 50? 100? It leans slightly now, slouched like a tired elder. But it's here. And some people came back. They rebuilt. They found higher ground. They learned. Some even made stories from the ruins. One tale speaks of a child born in the eye of a great storm, who grew up to become a peace chief. Another tells of a talking turtle who warned a village to flee and vanished as the waves hit. You stand at the shoreline, the wind now pushing harder. A storm is far off, but you feel it. A low pressure behind your eyes. A kind of old instinct. You ask yourself, how much history have we lost to wind and water? How many brilliant moments were dragged out to sea before anyone could carve them in wood or stack them into a mound? We romanticize ruins. But here? They often leave no trace. Except for the memory carried in stories. And sometimes, in a half-buried post. You press your hand to the damp wood and whisper a quiet, "Still here." Because someone should say it. The wind shifts again, not from storm this time, but from something heavier. History doesn't just wash away with the sea. Sometimes, it sails in on foreign ships. You feel it before you see it, the dread. The quiet before impact. You crest a dune and there they are, as strange shapes on the horizon, sails catching the wind like ghosts. At first, the locals probably didn't panic. Big canoes, maybe. Visitors from far off. Happens all the time. But these weren't cousins from the Gulf. These were colonizers. You sit down on the warm sand and watch the ships drift closer, their hulls dark and too tall. They don't fit the story. They split it. The first Floridians had seen outsiders before, trade had long tentacles, and goods traveled far. But these newcomers weren't here to swap conch beads for sassafras. They brought glass beads, iron nails, copper bells. Shiny things. Dangerous things. And diseases that didn't shimmer but killed quietly. Historians trace the first European contact in Florida to Ponce de Leon in 1513, but even before formal records, news traveled fast. Men from the sea with pale skin, strange clothes, and metal that cut cleaner than stone. Some tribes greeted them. Others didn't wait to find out what they wanted. You see it play out in the sand, like theater, a village sends a delegation. A gift is offered. The foreigners smile, accept, then ask odd questions. Where are your chiefs? How many warriors? Where's the gold? There is no gold. Then, sickness. Within a generation of contact, entire communities vanished, not from battle, but from viruses. Smallpox, measles, influenza. Invisible invaders. Historians still argue whether the initial population collapse was due more to disease or destabilized trade and war brought by European meddling. Either way, the result was the same: fragmentation. Disruption. Collapse. You walk through what might have been one of the last thriving mound towns before contact. It's too quiet. You see a collapsed hut, grass growing through the weave. A child's toy half buried in dust. A shell necklace, its cord rotted, scattered like a forgotten promise. The Spanish tried to name the people, label them for maps and missions. The French followed. Then the British. They called them Timucua, Apalachee, Calusa. Labels like price tags. The people themselves? They had their own names. Their own ways. Most are lost now. You pass what remains of a ceremonial structure, its posts long gone but the patterns still faint in the soil. A woman once stood here, arms raised, face painted with ash. She chanted to the sky, to her ancestors, to the world she knew was ending. And here's the twist: some communities adapted. Some intermarried. Some moved inland. Some resisted with fierce, haunting force. One story tells of a village that faked sickness to scare away Spanish soldiers. Another tells of a chief who welcomed them in, only to poison their stew. But the weight was too great. The shell roads cracked. The rituals faded. The mounds were abandoned, or repurposed, or used as lookout points by invaders who had no idea what lay beneath their boots. One quirky moment? At one point, Spanish friars tried to convert a mound into a Christian mission, plopped a chapel right on top of it. When they left, the locals burned it down. Twice. That's persistence. You sit at the edge of a canal dug by hands long before Europe had finished inventing forks. The water still flows. A frog leaps in, unbothered. You touch the mud and wonder, did anyone survive? Some did. Their blood flows today in Seminole, Miccosukee, and Creek descendants. Not the same tribes, but echoes. Resilient echoes. The first Floridians didn't vanish. They fractured. Fled. Adapted. Their stories went underground, whispered in kitchens, hidden in songs, wrapped into folktales about talking animals and haunted rivers. You hear one now. A soft voice nearby, someone reciting a tale to a child. A fox who tricked the storm. A girl who swallowed the moon to hide her village from the sky. You listen, eyes closed. Because sometimes, survival is quieter than conquest. It sounds like a bedtime story. It looks like a child's footprint in the mud beside an ancient fish trap. It feels like hope, hiding just beneath sorrow. The air is thick again, not with heat, not with storm, but with silence. Not empty, though. It's a rich, echoing hush. The kind that lingers in places people once loved. You stand at the edge of a clearing where no one stands anymore. The mounds are still here. Faded. Slumped like tired shoulders. But they remember. This is the part of the story no one really taught you in school. The quiet part. The aftermath. What we forgot, what remains. You move through it slowly, tracing the outlines of homes that aren't homes anymore. Foundation ridges. Post holes. A potsherd the color of fire. This was someone's world. Now, it's barely a footnote. A trivia question. A road sign in a county no one spells correctly. You kneel at a spot where a shell midden was sliced in half by a drainage ditch. The layers stare back, white, grey, black, white again. Time in sediment. You reach out to touch it, half expecting a hand to reach back. It doesn't. But still. A crow lands on the branch above you and squawks like it knows something you don't. You nod. I get it, you whisper. I'm late to the story. Because these were the first Floridians. They were astronomers, gardeners, builders, weavers. They mapped the stars with dirt and fed whole towns with tidal traps. They carved gods into wood and gave their dead to the earth like sacred seeds. And most of us have never said their names. Not because we don't care, but because we never knew them. The names we have, Timucua, Calusa, Apalachee, are echoes. Labels pressed on them after contact. The people who built the earliest mounds? We don't know what they called themselves. Their real names were lost before we thought to ask. Historians still argue whether it's better to label these cultures by location, by style, by archaeological phase. Archaic. Woodland. Mississippian. But none of those names feel like people. None of them laugh. Or grieve. Or love. You walk up one last mound. Not the biggest. Not the best preserved. Just one that feels final. At the top, you sit. Again. Like you did at the beginning. Below, the swamp stirs. A breeze lifts. Fireflies start blinking their slow, patient code. Somewhere, someone is lighting a cooking fire. You smell it, wood smoke, something sweet, maybe catfish. The past flickers. You remember the palm huts, the shark-tooth bling, the sacred spirals. You remember the chants and the canoes and the roads that pointed at constellations. You remember that the mounds aren't graves. They're messages. Not just we were here, but we are still here. Somewhere, on back roads and riverbanks, their descendants walk. They remember in different ways now, through stories, through crafts, through silence. You wish you could say thank you. So you do. Softly. Just once. Just in case someone's still listening. The air is still now. Softer. Even the insects hum like they're winding down. You close your eyes, lying flat on the last mound, feeling the earth under your back, solid, steady, full of quiet voices. You've traveled far tonight. Not through space, really, but through layers. Through thousands of years compressed into soil and story. You've walked with the first Floridians, people who built with basket and will, who danced in circles older than memory, who followed stars without ever writing them down. You saw their homes, breezy, palm-thatched, woven with love and urgency. You tasted their feasts. You sat by their fires. You mourned their dead. And you watched, helpless and quiet, as time washed much of it away. But not everything. Because even now, in the rustle of the reeds and the shape of the land, something remains. Something that didn't ask for monuments or textbooks. Just silence. Attention. Respect. You breathe slower now. You feel the breeze brush your face like a story told in a language older than words. The mound beneath you doesn't move, but it holds you. Like a lullaby. Like a cradle. You are part of this now, just one more traveler resting on the memory of those who came before. Let that hold you. Let that carry you into sleep. Let that remind you that the past is never gone. It's just sleeping, waiting, in the ground beneath your feet. Now hush. Let the stars turn overhead. And dream.